So I'm from Japan and America, and basically a little brief history of World War II involving those two countries is mainly based in the Pacific, considered the War of the Pacific. And I won't go into other aspects, but or like other locations, for example, what happened in Europe. But basically, to my knowledge, what happened was Japan joined the Axis force with Italy and Germany, and because of that they wanted to expand further, so they ended up taking a lot of the Pacific Islands, like a lot of islands in the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and even went as far south as like some places in Australia. The biggest, however, conflict happened when Japan launched an attack on Pearl Harbor, which was in Hawaii. And that's like how the US entered World War II, in essence, basically because Japan was directly attacking America, and Japan sought to bomb Pearl Harbor because that's where the U.S. stored a lot of their like Navy ships, battleships, and aircraft carriers. And in response, the U.S. kind of started a counterattack, and one of like the big points of this was, for example, the Battle of Midway, where Japan lost a few of its aircraft carriers. It was a very decisive naval battle, and then the U.S. also basically kept pushing, kept pushing. Another big operation was Truck Lagoon, also known as Operation Hailstone, I believe. And that was like if Japan had attacked the US by bombing Pearl Harbor, then the US had attacked Japan by bombing Truck Lagoon. So there, the US was able to take out a lot of Japan's Navy forces. And in essence, basically, the U.S. kind of kept pushing, pushing across the Pacific. They kept retaking islands all the way to basically when they hit mainland Japan. And at that point, Japan had like no navy arsenal left, no battleships, no aircraft carriers, or at least not enough to conceivably be seen as a threat. However, when the U.S. kind of started attacking mainland Japan, the Japanese had started using kamikaze as like a serious method of war. Although they did use them before with their pilots, I'm pretty sure that when U.S. soldiers, for example, were landing on mainland Japan, the Japanese were getting citizens to do kamikaze attacks. And it was quite scary for the US and to kind of see this. And it was very clear that Japan wasn't going to surrender, even after tons of firebombing, after tons of bombing different cities and whatnot. I think one of the cities that was actually firebombed was a bit of Tokyo as well. And at this point, it led to a very controversial decision, which is interesting because as like Japanese American, I've kind of seen like both of the sides, and to be honest, I don't know what is the right decision. You can really argue for both of them. But basically, at this point, right when World War II was kind of wrapping up, Japan didn't surrender. The US decided to drop two atomic bombs, one in Hiroshima and the other in Nagasaki. And this, after they had dropped the atomic bombs, Japan had surrender, and that kind of marked the end. As I if my understanding is correct, but that was like the big event that kind of ended the war in the Pacific and showed the U.S.'s victory. And the reason why I said it's like a controversial decision is from the Japanese point of view, they had decided to not only drop one nuclear bomb, the U.S. not only decided to drop one nuclear bomb, but they had dropped two, which had killed tons of people, and a lot of unnecessary deaths happened in cities, and they had killed a ton of civilians. They weren't targeting particular military areas. They were targeting cities to kind of for the U.S. to show their firepower. So that's like you could say from the Japanese viewpoint, it seems as like a pretty big unnecessary bombing and killing of civilians. But at the same time, from the U.S. perspective, you could also consider that the U.S. didn't really know what else would work. Especially because Japan was getting their civilians to do kamikaze attacks, and Japan did not seem like they were going to surrender. And the other argument to be made, which I'm not exactly true how big of a factor this was in deciding to drop two bombs, but I also believe that the U.S. Was fearing that that Russia at the time also had possession of nuclear weapons, and if they had dropped one nuclear bomb, the US may seem like, yeah, we have possession of nuclear weapons, but we may not be able to do it again. So that's why they had to do it twice to kind of possibly show Russia that they had the capacity to do multiple nuclear bombs. Again, I don't know how big of a factor that was. It was a more thing on, yeah. it was a bigger thing on really kind of getting the Japanese to surrender. And yeah, that's like a bit short summary of both of like the countries that were involved in World War II that I kind of like grew up with and identify with. And in terms of how I feel about Japanese students learning about World War II, I think, especially since I've been to Hiroshima, it can be like really scary. I think it's really important if you are going to teach World War II that you do it in, especially like when considering the involvement with the U.S., that you do it in the right narrative, not just the winning perspectives narrative, like the U.S. perspective, because then it's gonna make Japan seem like a horrible country. And I don't think, while there were some things that Japan did that were definitely, things that are not forgivable and were horrible at the time, I don't think that's the whole side of the story. There was definitely, like, I can tell you, there's, Japanese Americans in the mainland U.S. faced a ton of racism, and also American prisoners of war. That's a whole other story that I've actually learned about. But I do think that if you were to teach World War II to Japanese students, it's important to, explain all the facts. You gotta like tell from the story from both sides. I do think the biggest one is probably the atomic bombs, as that's the incident that's probably affected Japan the most. And it's really important to tell that narrative from both sides of the story, and to kind of have a future outlook of, let's hope that nuclear bombs are never dropped again and people don't have to die as much as they did in those two bombings.